Welcome to Big Breaking News of America. The brutal murder of Johnia Berry, a 21-year-old graduate student at the University of Tennessee, in the early morning hours of the 6th of December, 2004, remains one of Knoxville, Tennessee's most haunting and complex criminal cases. This tragedy, marked by a violent home invasion, a prolonged investigation, and an unresolved quest for full justice, captivated the community and left a lasting impact on Tennessee's legal landscape. The story is not only about a senseless act of violence but also about the resilience of a family, the challenges of forensic investigation, and the lingering questions surrounding the true scope of the crime. Below is a comprehensive exploration of the case, detailing the events of the murder, the investigation, the suspects, the mystery that persists, and the aftermath, including the legislative legacy inspired by Johnia's memory. The night of the murder. Johnia Berry was a vibrant, ambitious young woman with a promising future. Born and raised in Johnson City, Tennessee, she was pursuing a master's degree in psychology with aspirations of becoming a child psychologist. Described by her family and friends as kind, compassionate, and full of life, Johnia was engaged to her college sweetheart, Jason White, a law student in Michigan. The couple had already planned their wedding, chosen a date, and even discussed names for their future children. At the time of her death, Johnia was living in a modest apartment at Brendan Park in West Knox County, sharing the space with a roommate, Jason Amami, whom she had met during her undergraduate years at East Tennessee State University. On the cold, rainy night of the 6th of December, 2004, around 4 a.m., the quiet of the Brendan Park apartment complex was shattered by a violent intrusion. According to accounts from the investigation, an intruder entered Johnia's apartment through an unlocked back door, likely with the intent to steal car keys or other valuables. The apartment was dark, and Johnia was asleep in her bedroom. The intruder, failing to find what he was looking for in the living room, entered Johnia's bedroom and attacked her with a knife. The assault was brutal and relentless. Johnia was stabbed 22 times, sustaining wounds to her chest, neck, and arms. The ferocity of the attack suggested a frenzied or panicked assailant, and the number of wounds indicated a struggle. Johnia's screams woke her roommate, Jason Amami, who was sleeping in another room. As Amami emerged from his bedroom to investigate, he too was attacked. The intruder stabbed him in the chest and struck him in the face, but Amami managed to escape the apartment. Bleeding and disoriented, he ran to a nearby convenience store to call 911. In a desperate bid for help, Johnia staggered out of her bedroom, through the apartment, and down 2 flights of stairs, knocking on neighbors' doors. Tragically, no one responded to her pleas, possibly due to the early hour or fear of danger. She collapsed at the front entrance of the apartment building, covered in blood. First responders arrived quickly but found Johnia barely clinging to life. She was rushed to a local hospital, where she succumbed to her injuries shortly after arrival. The scene at the apartment was chaotic and gruesome. Blood was found throughout Johnia's bedroom, on the murder weapon, a bent kitchen knife, on the back door, and along the stairwell where Johnia had fled. The knife, which had a broken handle, bore traces of blood from Johnia, Amami, and an unknown male, indicating the presence of an intruder. This third DNA profile would become a critical piece of evidence, but it also marked the beginning of a long and frustrating investigation. The initial investigation and suspicion. The Knoxville Police Department, KPD, and the Knox County Sheriff's Office, KCSO, immediately launched a homicide investigation. The brutality of the crime and the fact that it occurred in a relatively safe neighborhood shocked the community. Early on, Investigators focused on those closest to Johnia, as is standard in homicide cases. Her fiancé, Jason White, was quickly cleared, as he was in Michigan at the time of the murder, with no feasible way to have traveled to Knoxville and back undetected. However, Jason Amami, the roommate who survived the attack, became a person of interest. Amami's survival and relatively minor injuries compared to Johnia's raised suspicions. He had a deep stab wound to the chest and superficial cuts, but his account of the attack, that he was stabbed upon leaving his bedroom and fled to get help, was scrutinized. Some investigators and even Johnia's family found his behavior odd, particularly when he attended her funeral. Amami was subjected to a polygraph test, which initially suggested deception, further fueling suspicion. However, subsequent analysis revealed that the polygraph examiner had made an error, and Amami passed the test. More importantly, the DNA evidence from the crime scene, specifically the unknown male's blood on the knife and elsewhere, corroborated Amami's story of an intruder. He was officially cleared as a suspect, though public speculation lingered. With Amami ruled out, the investigation shifted to identifying the unknown male whose DNA was found at the scene. The blood was tested against the National DNA Database, CODIS, but no match was found. This was a significant setback, as the database lacked the comprehensive data needed to generate leads. Investigators also collected a composite sketch based on Amami's description of the attacker, a stocky male, approximately 20 years old, 5'8" tall, with dark blonde hair, droopy eyes, and a weight of around 180 pounds. The sketch was widely distributed, but it yielded no immediate results. The police explored other leads, including a series of car burglaries in the Brendan Park area around the time of the murder. A tip suggested that a group of young men had been involved in these thefts, and the theory emerged that Johnia's murder may have been the result of a botched burglary. The intruder, possibly looking for car keys, may have panicked when confronted by Johnia, leading to the violent attack. Despite these theories, the case began to stall. Hundreds of DNA samples were collected from local residents and potential suspects, but none matched the profile from the crime scene. Rewards were offered, billboards were erected, and Johnia's family pleaded for information, but the investigation remained at a standstill for nearly 3 years. The breakthrough, Taylor Lee Olson. In April 2007, a significant break came in the case. An individual driving by a billboard featuring the composite sketch called police to report that they recognized the suspect. The tip pointed to Taylor Lee Olson, a 22-year-old Knoxville man with a history of petty crimes, including theft and burglary. Olson had grown up in relative affluence but had fallen into a pattern of criminal behavior, often associated with drugs and alcohol. At the time of Johnia's murder, he was living at Warren House, an apartment complex near Brendan Park, with a friend named Noah Thomas Cox. Investigators moved quickly to investigate Olson. They obtained a DNA sample, which matched the unknown male profile found at the crime scene. Additionally, Olson's fingerprints were found on the handle of the broken knife, made in Johnia's blood, providing further evidence of his presence during the murder. In September 2007, Olson was indicted on charges of felony murder, first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, for the attack on Amami, and aggravated burglary. The arrest brought a sense of relief to Johnia's family, particularly her mother, Joan Berry, who had tirelessly advocated for justice. When confronted with the DNA evidence, Olson initially denied involvement, even accusing detectives of fabricating the results. However, he soon changed his story, admitting to being in the apartment that night. According to Olson, he and Noah Cox had spent the evening of the 5th of December, 2004, drinking stolen beer, smoking marijuana, and breaking into cars in the Brendan Park area. After becoming separated in the rain, Olsen claimed he wandered onto Johnia's back porch, found the door unlocked, and entered the apartment looking for car keys. He alleged that the attack on Johnia was an accident, though he provided no clear explanation for the brutality of the stabbing or his attack on Amy. Olsen's account raised more questions than it answered. His claim of an accidental killing seemed implausible given the number and severity of Johnia's wounds. Moreover, his story hinted at the possible involvement of another person, specifically Noah Cox. Investigative documents revealed that Olsen and Cox were unusually concerned about a Braves baseball cap found near the crime scene, which may have contained DNA. Olsen insisted he had never worn the cap, while Cox offered to provide a hair sample to prove it wasn't his. These inconsistencies suggested to some investigators that Cox may have been present during the crime, though no direct evidence linked him to the murder. The mystery of Noah Thomas Cox. Noah Thomas Cox, then 24, emerged as a secondary figure in the case, adding a layer of mystery that persists to this day. Cox, like Olsen, had a criminal record and was on probation at the time of the murder. He lived with Olsen at Warren House and was known to associate with him in petty criminal activities. Olsen's defense team, led by attorney Gregory Isaacs, began developing a theory that Cox was the primary perpetrator of Johnia's murder. According to this narrative, Cox and Olsen broke into the apartment together, but Cox was the one who stabbed Johnia after she injured Olsen with a knife. Olsen, bleeding from his wounds, fled the scene, leaving Cox to complete the attack. This theory was supported by a statement from Augustin Joseph Leon, a drug addict and associate of both Olsen and Cox. Leon claimed that Cox had confessed to him about stabbing Johnia after breaking into her apartment. According to Leon, Johnia had cut Olsen with a knife during the struggle, prompting Cox to intervene violently. While Leon's credibility was questionable due to his drug use and criminal background, his statement fueled speculation that Olsen may not have acted alone. Despite these allegations, prosecutors found no concrete evidence to charge Cox with Johnia's murder. His DNA was not found at the crime scene, and no fingerprints or other forensic evidence linked him directly to the attack. Cox was interviewed extensively and provided inconsistent answers, particularly about the Braves cap, but he was never charged in connection with the homicide. At the time of Olsen's arrest, Cox was in prison on unrelated theft charges, and he faced a parole hearing shortly after. Johnia's mother, Joan, expressed frustration that Cox was not held accountable, believing he may have played a role in her daughter's death. The death of Taylor Olsen and unanswered questions. As Olsen's trial date approached, set for the 28th of July, 2008, the case took a devastating turn. In March 2008, Olsen was found dead in his jail cell at the Knox County Detention Facility. He had hanged himself using a bedsheet, despite being in a single cell and under hourly checks. Authorities reported no signs of suicidal behavior prior to his death, making the incident all the more shocking. Olsen left behind letters that pointed the blame at Noah Cox, alleging his involvement in the murder. These letters, however, were not considered sufficient evidence to pursue charges against Cox, as they lacked corroboration and were written by a man facing life in prison. Olsen's suicide was a profound blow to Johnia's family and the prosecution. Mike Berry, Johnia's father, called it the coward's admission of guilt, reflecting the family's belief that Olsen was responsible for the murder but had escaped justice by taking his own life. Joan Berry echoed this sentiment, noting that Olson's DNA and fingerprints at the scene were undeniable proof of his involvement. However, she also expressed frustration that his death prevented a trial, which might have clarified whether others, particularly Cox, were involved. The absence of a trial left many questions unanswered. Was Olson the sole perpetrator, or did Cox play a role? Why was the attack so brutal if the intent was merely to steal car keys? What was the significance of the Braves cap, and why were Olson and Cox so fixated on it? Assistant District Attorney General Kevin Allen, who summarized the case, believed that Olson was the primary culprit but did not rule out the possibility of a second suspect. He noted that the presence of two missing hats, only one of which was found, suggested that two individuals may have been involved, at least in the burglary. However, without further evidence, Cox remained uncharged, and the case was officially closed with Olson's death. The legacy of Johnia Berry. The murder of Johnia Berry had a profound impact on her family, the Knoxville community, and Tennessee's legal system. Joan Berry, devastated by the loss of her daughter, channeled her grief into advocacy. She became a vocal proponent of DNA arrestee legislation, which requires individuals arrested for violent felonies to submit DNA samples for analysis. At the time of Johnia's murder, Tennessee's DNA database was limited, contributing to the 3-year delay in identifying Olson. Joan's efforts, supported by her family and community advocates, led to the passage of the Johnia Berry Act of 2007. This law mandated DNA collection upon arrest for violent crimes, ensuring that future investigations could benefit from a more robust database. The Johnia Berry Act was a significant achievement, not only for Johnia's family but for victims of violent crime across Tennessee. Joan continued her work through Hope for Victims, an organization dedicated to supporting families affected by violent crime and promoting legislative changes to enhance public safety. She also organized annual toy drives in Johnia's memory, distributing gifts to needy children in the community, a reflection of Johnia's compassionate spirit. The case also received significant media attention, with coverage on true crime programs such as Sleeping with Death on Oxygen and 20/20 on ABC. The 20/20 episode, titled Blood on the Door, aired on the 9th of May, 2025, and highlighted Joan's relentless pursuit of justice and the legislative changes inspired by Johnia's case. These programs brought national awareness to the tragedy and underscored the importance of DNA evidence in solving violent crimes. The lingering mystery. Despite the resolution of the case with Olson's death, the murder of Johnia Berry remains shrouded in mystery. The possibility of a second suspect, particularly Noah Cox, continues to haunt those familiar with the case. Cox's alleged confession to Augustine Leon, while compelling, was never substantiated, and his lack of forthrightness during interviews raised suspicions that were never fully addressed. The Braves cap, the missing second hat, and the inconsistencies in Olson's and Cox's stories suggest that the full truth may never be known. For Johnia's family, the closure provided by Olson's identification and death was bittersweet. While they firmly believe he was responsible for the murder, the absence of a trial and the lingering questions about Cox's involvement prevent complete resolution. Joan Berry has stated that the case will never be over for her family, but she remains committed to honoring Johnia's memory through advocacy and community service. Conclusion. The murder of Johnia Berry is a tragic tale of a young life cut short, a family's unyielding fight for justice, and a community's struggle to make sense of senseless violence. The case highlights the critical role of DNA evidence in modern policing, the challenges of investigating complex crimes, and the enduring impact of loss on those left behind. Taylor Lee Olson's identification as the primary suspect brought a measure of accountability, but his suicide and the unresolved questions about Noah Cox's involvement left the case with an incomplete narrative. Through the Johnia Berry Act and Joan Berry's advocacy, Johnia's legacy lives on, ensuring that her death was not in vain. Yet, the mystery of that rainy December night in 2004 lingers, a reminder of the fragility of life and the elusive nature of truth in the face of tragedy. Thank you for watching Big Breaking News of America. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for more news updates. Share our channel with your friends and family members, leave a like for more videos and express your thoughts under comment section.